Hello everyone. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Group 4 Bioethics 475 Video Critique. Our group comprises of 8 members, namely Shania Bowe, Naomi Cartwright, Anicia Corley, Shamaya Kulma, Tyreek Gomez, Sandira Kemp, Krayana Roll, and Shavana Vanderpool. The essay we choose for this assignment is Isn't Everyone Selfish? By Nathaniel Branden, and can be found in Chapter 5 of Ayn Rand's book, The Virtue of Selfishness. This essay addresses 2 ethical systems with divergent outlooks on selfishness, egoism, and altruism. Our premise is to provide an unbiased stance on this topic and consider both viewpoints. Everyone is selfish and, in contrast, not selfish. Thank you.
In his essay, Isn't Everyone Selfish?, featured in Ayn Rand's book, The Virtue of Selfishness, Nathaniel Branden argues that selfishness is present in every aspect of our lives and actions. Even those acts which we consider selfless contain some degree of selfishness. He establishes his point by comparing 2 ethical systems with divergent outlooks on selfishness, egoism, and altruism. While egoism involves acting in a way that benefits oneself, altruism involves working in a manner that benefits someone other than yourself. Branden questions the idea that no one ever really sacrifices themselves, since a person's desire drives every direct action. Flawed ideas, according to Branden, are the consequence of intellectual misunderstanding, and due to this, individuals misinterpret the words selfishness and egoism, as well as self-sacrifice and altruism.
Selfishness involves a refusal to sacrifice a higher value to a lower or non-value, and a hierarchy of values set by the standard of one's own self-interest. Branden argues that truly selfish persons choose their path through reason, and because of this rational behavior, others benefit from his actions despite the benefit not being the primary goal behind these actions. Branden argues that our feelings do not determine self-sacrificial or selfless acts, but that this is determined objectively. He states that it doesn't matter whether someone wants to act, but why they wish to act. The answer to this question establishes the selfishness or selflessness of the action. He uses this stance to present the point that men will eventually and knowingly act against their own range of happiness, which altruism believes is selfish. However, this is a contradiction of altruism.
For this critique, our group decided to go with approach number 3, which states that we are to define our project in terms of arguments and views that we find interesting but are currently disinclined to either fully accept or fully reject. In this case, we have 2 arguments or views. We then will carefully articulate the strongest considerations in favor of the view and the strongest considerations against the views. Lastly, we will explain why we remain undecided and indicate the information required to take a stand.
Argument number 1. Everyone is selfish.
Ayn Rand, in her book, The Virtue of Selfishness, defines selfishness as concern with one's own interests. An interesting view to this argument is a reference made by Rand that a genuinely selfish man chooses his goals by the guidance of reason. And because the interests of rational men do not clash, other men may often benefit from his actions. Despite this, however, this does not deflect from the idea that everyone is selfish, but rather that the benefit of other men is not his primary purpose or goal. His own benefit is his primary purpose, and the conscious goal is to directing his actions. According to the theory of psychological egoism, everyone acts from the motive of self-interest and is based on selfishness or doing what he or she wants. Hence, we agree with Rand when selfishness is meant in a definitive way. That is, the tendency to seek and promote one's comfort and satisfaction before anybody else's, or taking the best for themselves before anyone else. Selfish people in this sense are the people who, for instance, always try to get the finest piece of chicken, or the biggest glass of wine, or the best seat for themselves. In fact, a recent study used a version of the classic prisoner's dilemma, testing people's willingness to set aside selfish interests to reach a greater good. After modeling different strategies and outcomes, the researchers found that being selfish was more advantageous than cooperating. Another reason we can agree with Rand that everyone is selfish is that research has shown that people have been justifying selfishness for decades now. According to Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations, 1776, persons who pursue their own interests enhance society's general welfare. You may also know this as capitalism. Another 8 years later, Charles Darwin came out with his theory of natural selection, which most people know as survival of the fittest, where those who look for the best or number one would survive while the others would be swept away. In the article, How Selfish Are People, Really? By David Walsh, he states that, and I quote, emotions such as love, loyalty, outrage, like a sense of fairness, have little or no place in today's utility functions. A narrow selfishness is pervasive, end quote. We can easily think of a few acts that are selfish that can be seen carried out by individuals today, such as withholding important information in order to save face, taking all the credit for something they got assistance with, contributing to a toxic work culture by bringing others down, the need to be always right even when they're wrong, avoid celebrating others' success, avoiding comforting others, being manipulative, and being unreceptive to constructive criticism.
An interesting view raised by Rand against selfishness is the importance of not erasing the fundamental psychological truism that it is a fallacy to equate motivated behavior with selfish behavior. While it can be agreed that all actions contain some semblance of self-interest, not every action can be heavily classified as selfish. While we understand Branden's point of view, we disagree that genuine selfishness is a profound human achievement. In fact, in a capitalistic society, elements of genuine selfishness can be seen daily, and in some areas, such a display of placing oneself before others is praised. We disagree with Branden because while selfish acts are plentiful, so are small acts of selflessness. Many individuals have been seen carrying out various acts that serve no other purpose than to improve someone else's well-being. A few examples of simple, selfless acts are bringing coffee to a co-worker, paying for a meal for a stranger, offering a seat to pregnant or elderly individuals, or self-sacrifice, giving your last to those who need it more. Also, a study by the Common Cause Foundation reveals two transformative findings. The first is that most of the 1,000 people surveyed, 74% identify more strongly with unselfish values than selfish ones. This means that they are more interested in helpfulness, honesty, forgiveness, and justice more than money, fame, status, and power. The second is that a similar majority, 78%, believes others to be more selfish than they really are. Moreover, considering what we know about utilitarianism, we would agree that people do not always act selfishly. The theory of utilitarianism explores the question, what ought a person to do in certain situations? A utilitarianist says the answer is that a person ought to act to maximize happiness or pleasure and minimize unhappiness or pain. Altruist ethics disregards the long-range well-being of a person. Although a person may commit an act in the hopes of satisfying the needs of someone else, altruism would see that action through the lens of self-motivation, contradicting the definition of selfishness. However, unlike Rand asserts, it is not complete mysticism that one person can find happiness without renouncing his own happiness. There is a level of truth in the statement, for one can achieve satisfaction from a life of self-sacrifice. Altruism in itself cannot exist at the extreme end of the spectrum, and there should be a consideration given to the concentration of the altruistic intentions in any given actions. The existence alone of beneficence and non-maleficence gives weight to the arguments that everyone is not selfish. These two principles are key pillars of bioethics and prove that while people may do things in their self-interest, they want to place others' needs on the same level as ours or even higher. Medical practitioners, mainly doctors, quite literally take an oath of non-maleficence and dedicate their lives to serving others. If everyone were selfish, such principles would not exist, and doctors would simply heal patients as long as they benefit heavily from such.
Branden provides a series of salient points throughout his essay, but we cannot comprehensively endorse every fact brought forth. The author standardizes all actions as either selfish or selfless. Using these two as maximums invalidates the plethora of experiences where altruism and egoism may collide. The complexity of life does not always lend itself to situations where one's decisions can be entirely in pursuit of their happiness or for the complete happiness of others. Often man's actions can be symbiotic, a combination of serving their own interests and serving the interests of others. It is partially true that everyone is selfish. Altruism in its purest form is not feasible or sustainable. However, that does not mean that altruism does not exist in some form and operates in a functional moral code. We agree that to some extent, all actions, even those deemed self-sacrificial, have slivers of self-interest embedded. Just as the only way to be moral, according to Rawls, is to go behind the veil of ignorance. One can only truly determine the unselfishness of an action through an objective analysis on why a person pursues a specific course of action. It has nothing to do with feelings, which is not a criterion of ethics. Selfishness is to be seen on a smaller scale, a series of consecutive actions pointing towards an ultimate goal of fulfilling self-interest at all costs, rather than a predominant guide to man's purpose in choosing activities. At the end of the essay, Branden considers true selfishness, and I quote, a profound moral achievement, and we beg to differ. To devote oneself to a life of pursuing one's own interests is easy, especially considering the capitalistic society we live in. A frontier mentality is a commonplace in the Western world, where placing your own success above others is celebrated and praised among specific communities. Finally, we propose that instead, establishing a healthy, cohesive balance between advancing self-interest while advancing the wills of others be more so seen as a moral accomplishment. For it is much more challenging to work in the middle ground of egoism and altruism. Had Branden provided more information and examples on his stance that selfishness is a profound achievement for individuals, it would be easier to decipher whether individuals would be considered more selfish or selfless.
In ending, this essay has highlighted various ethical systems with views on selfishness such as egoism and altruism. In contrast to egoism, altruism entails working for the benefit of others rather than oneself. Isn't everyone selfish? Illustrates how selfishness creeps into every area of our lives. Even though we agreed with some of the assertions in this essay, we also disagreed with others. As individuals with personal experience, we disagree that selfishness is a profound achievement, as we have seen selfless acts in society. In addition, considering what we know about utilitarianism, we would agree that people do not always act selfishly. Rand could have provided more examples and information on how selfishness can be a profound achievement for individuals, making it easier to diagnose whether individuals are indeed more selfish than selfless. There is no denying that self-interest lurks in all actions, even those deemed self-sacrificing. However, this essay lacked the evidence and research needed for us to fully accept or reject the claims that people are selfish or not. Thank you for tuning into our video critique.